Cops shoot black man's wife in 12 a.m. raid. Unaware he's a former Navy SEAL commander. Before we start today's story, comment below where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you haven't already. You won't want to miss what's next. Officer Blake's voice exploded through the night as his boot slammed into the Ward family's front door. The wood splintered, the frame cracked, and the quiet home filled with shouting and heavy footsteps. Flashlights sliced through the darkness, cutting across the narrow hallway. "Same thing every time," Blake muttered, sweeping the house with his rifle like it was already condemned. His jaw clenched, eyes hard and impatient. He spat on the floor and turned toward the living room. His flashlight beam froze on a woman standing by the couch, Elena Ward, trembling in her nightgown. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This is our home." The sound of the gunshot cut her off before she could finish. The blast swallowed her words, filling the house with the deafening roar of death. Elena's body jerked backward, then dropped beside the couch. Blood spread fast across the carpet, dark and shining under the flashlights. "Target neutralized," Blake said coldly, lowering his weapon. On the floor, Caleb Ward, Elena's husband, dropped to his knees beside her. His hands pressed against the wound as he shouted for help, for anyone to call 911. None of the officers knew that the man they had just ambushed was a former Navy SEAL commander, someone who had spent 20 years walking through chaos and surviving it. Before we go any further, comment where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The living room glowed in the soft blue light of the television. Caleb leaned back in his worn-out leather recliner, half watching a documentary about military strategy, half watching his wife Elena sitting across from him. She was curled up on the couch, her reading glasses perched low on her nose, focused on the medical files from her clinic. She was dedicated, the kind of nurse everyone in town respected. Their phones buzzed at the same time. The screen lit up with their daughter Naomi's smiling face on a video call. "Just checking in on my favorite people before bed," she said, her grin bright and teasing. "You should be sleeping, baby girl," Elena said, smiling softly even as she shuffled her papers. "Says the woman doing paperwork at midnight," Naomi teased. "Dad, make her go to bed." Caleb chuckled. "You know your mother. Once she starts something, she doesn't stop until it's done." They talked about Naomi's latest social media campaign, about Elena's busy week at the clinic, and about Caleb's new project at the Veterans Center. Their laughter filled the house. Before hanging up, they promised to meet for Sunday dinner, just like always. When the call ended, the house settled into quiet again. The only sounds were the voices from the TV and the soft rustle of Elena's papers. Then came the crash. It was sudden, violent, and loud enough to shake the walls. The front door exploded inward, pieces of wood flying everywhere. Before either of them could move, flashbangs lit up the kitchen. The air filled with blinding white light and thunderous bangs that made the walls tremble. Caleb reacted on instinct. 2 decades of military training took over. His breathing slowed, his senses sharpened. He dropped low, scanning for entry points, counting shadows, identifying threats. "Police! Don't move!" Several voices screamed at once. Elena stood up, her papers scattering across the floor like snow. She raised her hands high, voice shaking. "We're unarmed. We don't have any." A gunshot cracked through the chaos. The bullet hit her in the chest. Her reading glasses flew off. Her body collapsed to the floor, her floral robe spreading around her like spilled paint. "Elena!" Caleb shouted, sliding to her side. His voice turned steady, calm, the way it always did in emergencies. "Officer, stand down. I'm applying pressure to a wound." He grabbed a dish towel from the counter, pressing it hard against the bleeding. His movements were fast but controlled. With one hand, he reached for his phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? "This is Caleb Ward," he said clearly. 1242, Maple Grove Lane. "My wife has been shot by an officer. I am applying pressure to a chest wound. We need immediate medical attention." "Sir, are you in a safe location?" the operator asked. "I am unarmed," he said calmly. "There are no weapons in this room." I'm maintaining pressure on my wife's wound. Get your hands where we can see them, an officer shouted. Stand up, another ordered. Caleb didn't move. I can't comply with conflicting commands, he said evenly. I'm applying pressure to her wound. I am not resisting. Send medical help immediately. Seconds dragged into minutes. Elena's breathing grew weaker, her eyes locked on his face. Caleb kept talking, to her, to the 911 operator, to the shouting officers, keeping his mind sharp through sheer will. Then, finally, sirens wailed outside. But when the EMTs arrived, the officers blocked their way. Caleb's voice rose, still calm but stronger now. I am asserting medical necessity. You are on record, obstructing emergency medical care. The lead paramedic hesitated, then pushed past the officers to reach Elena. Caleb stood back as they loaded her onto a stretcher. His eyes found Officer Blake, the man who fired the shot. Badge number 4471. He memorized everything about him. The shape of his face, the beads of sweat on his forehead, the way his finger twitched near the trigger. Caleb said nothing. His silence was louder than any threat. Outside, flashing red and blue lights painted the houses. Neighbors stood on porches, filming with their phones. Caleb followed the stretcher down the driveway, his hands and clothes stained with his wife's blood. He could feel Blake's stare on his back, a mix of fear and guilt beginning to set in. The ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren wailed, fading into the distance. Caleb stood alone in the cool morning air, watching the light of dawn spill through his shattered doorway. The rising sun revealed the wreckage, splintered wood, broken furniture, and the blood-soaked towel lying in the kitchen. He looked down at his hands, steady, calm, still marked with blood. 20 years of combat had taught him how to turn fear into focus, pain into purpose. He whispered to the empty room, "You came into a SEAL's house. You don't even know what you started." The emergency room smelled of antiseptic and stress. Caleb sat stiffly in a hard plastic chair outside the trauma bay. His hands were still sticky with dried blood. Officers Blake and 2 others from the raid stood near the entrance, avoiding eye contact. Caleb pulled out his phone and opened the voice recorder. His tone was calm, professional, the same voice he once used to question captured enemies overseas. Officer Blake, badge number 4471, he said slowly. I'm requesting the names and badge numbers of all officers present during the incident at 1242 Maple Grove Lane. Blake's jaw clenched. Sir, you need to. State law February 14th, 38 requires officers to identify themselves upon request, Caleb interrupted. I am making that request now. One of the younger officers spoke nervously. Badge 4892, Officer Peterson. Badge 451, Officer Martinez, another said softly. Blake's face flushed red. He stepped forward, hand resting on his gun. Listen here. Officer Blake, Caleb said sharply. Your body language shows you're trying to intimidate me. I'm recording this conversation. Your hand is on your weapon even though there's no threat. The 2 younger officers stepped back. They could sense something in Caleb's calmness, the kind of control that comes from danger. You're interfering with an investigation, Blake snapped, his voice shaky. Which investigation? Caleb asked evenly. The one at my house? Then show me the warrant. That's my right under law January 7th, 42. Before Blake could respond, a tall man in a clean uniform appeared, Captain Henry Doyle. His shirt was pressed perfectly, but sweat already shone on his forehead. Mr. Ward, Doyle said quickly, I'm Captain Henry Doyle. Can I speak with you privately? Caleb stood, his movements deliberate. I'll talk, he said, but my phone will keep recording. That's my right. Of course, Doyle said, leading him into a quiet corner of the hallway. His tone lowered. Mr. Ward, there's been a serious mistake. A mistake, Caleb repeated coldly. The warrant was for 1224 Maple Grove, Doyle said quietly. Not 1242. We'll make it right. Medical bills, home repairs, whatever it takes. Caleb stared at him. Make it right. How exactly? The chief would like to meet you at 9 a.m. to discuss restitution, Doyle said quickly, glancing around nervously. We can handle this professionally. No need for this to escalate. Escalate, Caleb said, his voice calm but dangerous. My wife is in surgery because your men didn't check her address. Because Officer Blake fired without verifying a threat. And you're worried about escalation. The chief will make this right, Doyle said, forcing a weak smile. He extended his hand. You have my word. Caleb looked at it for a moment, then shook it firmly. His grip tight enough to make the captain wince. 9 o'clock, he said flatly. The next few hours passed in a blur. Nurses came and went. Doctors gave updates. Elena was stable but critical. The bullet had missed major organs, but she had lost a lot of blood. When the sun was up, Caleb walked the mile back to his home. The street was quiet, except for the crunch of glass under his boots, glass from flashbangs and broken windows. Yellow police tape fluttered in the morning breeze, circling his front yard. His door hung crookedly, one hinge broken. Inside, the house looked like a war zone. The kitchen floor was covered with papers and blood. Elena's glasses lay shattered near the refrigerator. The towel he had used to stop the bleeding was crumpled on the tile, still red and damp. He stood in the silence, taking it all in. You came into a SEAL's house, he whispered again. You don't even know what you started. Morning sunlight streamed through the broken windows, catching dust in the air. The coffee maker clicked on automatically, like it did every morning at 6. The sound was almost cruel, a normal routine in a house that would never be normal again. Down the street, neighbors started their cars, kids waited for school buses. Life continued like nothing had happened. But inside Caleb's kitchen, time was frozen at the moment the bullet hit. Elena's unfinished medical reports were still scattered on the floor. Her favorite mug sat waiting for coffee she'd never make. Before 8 a.m., Caleb was back at the hospital. The waiting room was almost empty. A few nurses changed shifts. An old couple slept in the corner. Caleb sat with a paper cup of coffee, staring blankly at the floor. The smell reminded him of Elena, who always joked that hospital coffee tasted like warm dishwater but drank it anyway. Then the voice of the TV anchor caught his attention. We're going live to a press conference with Police Chief Dana Mercer about last night's officer-involved shooting. Caleb looked up. Chief Mercer stood at a podium outside police headquarters. Her uniform was spotless, her hair perfect. Behind her, the American and state flags hung still. At approximately midnight, she began smoothly, officers executing a lawful search warrant encountered resistance at a home on Maple Grove Lane. During the warranted entry, a suspect interfered with police duties, creating a chaotic situation that resulted in injury to a civilian. Caleb's jaw tightened. He could feel his pulse rise. Our officers followed proper procedures, Mercer continued. Body camera footage confirms their professionalism. The screen flashed with short video clips, dark rooms, shouting, movement. For a second, Elena appeared with her hands raised, but the footage cut away before showing the gunshot. As you can see, Mercer's voice said over the video, our officers maintained control during a dangerous situation. We regret any injuries, but their duty is to protect both the public and themselves. An older nurse nearby shook her head. That's not what I heard, she muttered softly, not realizing Caleb was sitting just a few feet away. The press conference continued. Every sentence carefully built a story that wasn't true. There was no mention of the wrong address, no mention of the officers blocking the EMTs. Just polished lies spoken with confidence. A reporter asked, Chief, some sources say the warrant may have been for a different house. Can you comment on that? That's completely false, Mercer said smoothly. The warrant was properly executed. I can't comment further on an ongoing internal investigation. Caleb knew those words, ongoing internal investigation. He'd heard them before in the military. It meant, we're not going to tell you the T. Elena. He sat still, his coffee cold in his hand. On the TV, Chief Mercer smiled stiffly, promising transparency while hiding everything. The morning sun glared through the hospital windows, lighting up her face on the screen. To Caleb, she didn't look like a person anymore. She looked like a mask built from lies. A young reporter tried one more question. "Chief, can you confirm if any weapons were found at the scene?" Chief Mercer paused for just half a second, barely noticeable, but Caleb caught it. It was a tiny flicker in her expression, a moment of calculation before she spoke. "That's part of an ongoing investigation," she said in her calm, practiced tone. "We'll release all relevant details when appropriate." Caleb's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. "This is Lina Ningguan, Metro Daily Investigative Desk. Don't delete this message. I know what they're hiding. Don't speak to Internal Affairs. We need to talk securely." Caleb frowned. The name was familiar. He'd read her articles before. On the TV in front of him, the press conference ended and cut back to a news anchor. The man's voice droned through the quiet hospital waiting room. "Chief Mercer assures the public that a full internal investigation is underway after this tragic and unfortunate incident." The words made Caleb's jaw tighten. A nurse approached with a clipboard. "Mr. Ward, your wife is out of surgery," she said gently. "The doctor would like to speak with you." Caleb nodded, standing slowly. His movements were calm and deliberate, but his eyes stayed on the screen. They were replaying Mercer's words again. The suspect interfered with lawful service of a warrant. Caleb stared. The lie echoed in the empty room, bouncing off white walls and tile floors. His face hardened, not in open anger, but in a cold, controlled focus. It was the same look he used to wear during missions. They had chosen this battleground, he thought, not a firefight in the dark, but a war fought in daylight, with lies and press conferences. His phone buzzed again. Another text from the same number. "I have the unedited body cam footage. They're already erasing the records. We need to meet." Caleb looked around the waiting room. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows now, bright and unkind. The old couple across from him had woken up, watching the news with worried faces. The nurse was still waiting patiently with her clipboard. But Caleb didn't move. He just stared at Mercer's frozen face on the screen, her confident smile, her lie caught in high definition. "All right," he said quietly, almost to himself. "They want a war in the daylight? They'll get one." By 9 that night, the hospital cafeteria was nearly empty. The overhead lights were harsh, casting deep shadows across the room. The buzz of daytime activity was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of vending machines and the steady drumming of rain against the tall windows. Caleb sat alone in the corner, staring out at the storm. Water streaked down the glass in silver lines. His body was heavy with exhaustion, but his mind was alert. A woman entered, dark blazer, laptop bag over her shoulder. She moved carefully, scanning the room before walking over to him. "Lina Ningguan," she said softly as she slid into the chair across from him. "Caleb Ward," he replied, his tone steady. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. Her voice was calm, professional, but her eyes were sharp. "I know you've had a terrible day." Caleb gave a short nod. "You said you had something to show me." Lina looked around the cafeteria again before opening her laptop. The glow from the screen lit their faces in the dim room. "My source sent this an hour ago," she said. "It's from Office Blake's body cam, the full footage, not the edited clips they showed on TV. She turned the screen toward him. The video showed his kitchen from the night before. Tactical lights flashed across the counter. Everything looked exactly the way Caleb remembered, except for one thing. A black handgun lay on the counter beside where Elena had been standing. Caleb's hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. "That gun wasn't there," he said, his voice trembling with anger he barely controlled. "I described that counter in detail on the 911 call. 2 coffee mugs, 1 dish towel, Elena's medical charts. No weapon, nothing else." "I know," Lina said, leaning forward. "I listened to your 911 recording. You were methodical, calm, like you already knew you'd need evidence later." "Military training," Caleb said quietly. "Details matter." Evidence matters. He looked up at her. Where did you get this? I have a contact inside the department, she replied, lowering her voice. They're disturbed by what happened last night, and by what they've found out since. She pulled a small notepad from her bag, filled with tight handwriting. The gun wasn't planted by the police. It was placed there by a private security consultant who works with the city's redevelopment project. Outside, thunder rolled through the night, matching the tension in her words. The city's pushing a major urban renewal plan, she continued. A new stadium, luxury apartments, and complete neighborhood redesign. Your street is right in the middle of it. Caleb's expression darkened. The consultant works for Crane Protective Solutions, Lena said. They're partnered with the police department on something called Community Safety Initiatives. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Silas Crane, he muttered. You know him. Know of him, Caleb said bitterly. Former defense contractor. His company trains SWAT teams, advises on tactical raids. Basically, mercenaries wearing corporate suits. A janitor pushed a mop bucket past their table. They waited until he was gone before continuing. My source says Crane's people have been working with local police for months, Lena said. They're helping identify problem properties, houses that might resist the redevelopment plan. Your home wasn't supposed to be the target, but removing your block helps their schedule. Caleb stared at the image of the planted gun. His mind began connecting the dots. They needed a reason to justify the shooting, he said quietly. If Elena looked like she had a weapon, they could claim it was self-defense. He looked up, eyes hard. They tried to kill my wife twice. Once with bullets, once with lies. The department's already deleting records, Lena warned. My source says they're rewriting reports, erasing radio logs. By morning, they'll have their official version locked in. Lightning flashed outside, lighting the room white for a second. Then I'll find the Tielena myself, Caleb said. His voice was cold and steady. Every fake document, every edited video, every lie they buried. You said you have the full footage? Yes, Lena said. And more, building permits, zoning documents, private emails between Crane's people and city officials. But we can't publish anything without solid proof. One mistake and they'll discredit everything. I'll get you proof, Caleb said. They think they know how to hide evidence, but they've never dealt with someone trained to find it. Lena shut her laptop and stood. Be careful, Caleb. Crane's people play dirty, and they have the department on their side. Caleb stood too. So did every enemy I ever faced, he said. Didn't save them either. She handed him a small burner phone. Secure line. I'll be in touch. Caleb walked back through the quiet hospital corridors. The hum of the machines and the faint rain against the windows filled the silence. When he entered Elena's room, he paused. The monitors glowed softly. Elena lay still, her breathing slow but steady. White bandages covered her chest and shoulder. He sat beside her, took her hand and whispered, You hold on, baby. I'll make them tell the Tielena. The heart monitor beeped steadily, almost like it was answering him. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the city clean for another day of lies and revelations. At midnight, Caleb stood outside his home. The yellow police tape flapped in the wind like tattered flags. He ducked under it. They hadn't even fixed the door frame. Sloppy. Moving in the dark with silent precision, Caleb swept the house with his flashlight. 20 years of SEAL experience guided his steps. In the kitchen, the beam of light passed over bloodstains on the tile, Elena's blood, dried dark price. Caleb forced his anger down, channeling it into focus. He photographed everything, the blood patterns, the shell casings the police missed, the bullet holes in the walls. Standard four-man entry, he muttered. 2 front, 2 back. Blake was the point man here. He stood in the same spot the shooter must have stood. Something white glinted under the counter. Caleb crouched and found a small evidence tag half hidden under the baseboard. Using tweezers, he lifted it carefully. The tag read, Item number 4, Unregistered firearm, black semi-automatic. Sloppy again, Caleb whispered, snapping photos. You shouldn't leave your props behind. In the living room, he documented the smashed door, the scorch marks from the flashbang. Every tiny detail could become evidence later. His phone buzzed, a message from Lena. Serial number from that planted gun. Run it through this database. You'll want to see this. Caleb opened the link on his secure browser and entered the number from the tag. When the result appeared, he felt his jaw clench. Training inventory. DPS Tactical Solutions Division. The gun wasn't even real evidence. It was a training prop from Crane's company stock. Got you, Caleb breathed. You didn't even use a clean weapon. He moved upstairs, clearing each room with the same careful precision he'd used overseas. The bedroom was a wreck, overturned furniture, broken lamp, clothes everywhere. On the dresser, Elena's jewelry box lay open. Her favorite hummingbird pin glinted under the flashlight. Caleb picked it up gently, staring at it for a long moment before setting it back down. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Lena. Breaking, drone footage of DPS running raid drills 2 blocks away last week. Check your email. Caleb opened the video. It showed tactical teams practicing raids on empty houses. The timestamp, 3 days before Elena was shot. Then he noticed the map overlay. The practice area formed a straight corridor, matching the planned stadium route. His house sat right in the middle. We weren't the target, he realized out loud. We were an obstacle. He kept collecting evidence. Boot prints, bullet holes, shell casings in the garden. Every item was photographed, tagged, and logged with date and GPS. In his home office, Caleb found another mistake, a radio log left behind, with timestamps that didn't match the official report. He added it to his growing evidence folder. By 3 a.m., he had everything he needed. Sitting at the blood-stained kitchen table, Caleb compiled all the data into an encrypted file. Photos, radio logs, serial numbers, zoning plans, and Lena's documents. He thought of Elena lying in her hospital bed, fighting for her life because some company decided their home was in the way. His anger burned deep, but his movement stayed calm and careful. He wrote an email to Jerome Watson, a retired civil rights lawyer famous for taking on police corruption cases. They shot my wife. I have proof it was planned. Will you help me make them pay? Minutes later, a reply arrived. Call me in the morning. Don't talk to anyone else. Caleb sat back, staring around the dark kitchen. Elena's coffee mug still sat on the counter. Her blood stained the floor. They picked the wrong door, he whispered. And the wrong man. The evidence was gathered. The Tia Elena was ready. Now it was time to make them answer. The next morning, the old church smelled of coffee and lemon polish. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, coloring the wooden pews in soft shades of red and blue. Caleb sat in the church office, his evidence folder spread across a long table that had seen years of community meetings. Samuel Elijah Price entered, setting down 2 mugs of steaming coffee. At 70, he moved slowly but with quiet strength. The warrant looks clean on paper, Caleb said, sliding a document toward him. But something feels off about the timing. Samuel Price put on his glasses and studied the papers carefully. The devil's always in the details, son, he said. I've got people who can help us dig deeper. He pulled out his phone, fingers moving faster than Caleb expected for someone his age. Give me a minute. Within half an hour, 3 people arrived, a retired court clerk, a digital forensics expert, and a civil rights attorney. They sat around the table, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the hum of quiet determination. This was no longer just Caleb's fight. It was about Tia Elena, and the battle for it had only just begun. The forensics expert, a woman with silver-streaked hair tied neatly behind her head, opened her laptop on the old wooden table. Let's start with the metadata, she said calmly. Every digital document leaves traces, even the ones people try to erase. Caleb watched closely as she opened the PDF of the police warrant. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, navigating through hidden information most people never even knew existed. The glow of the laptop screen reflected off her glasses as she frowned slightly, then leaned closer. "Wait," she said, her voice sharp now. "Look at these timestamps." Everyone in the room moved closer. The document's creation time read 3:21 a.m. Caleb's heart sank. That was almost 20 minutes after the raid on his home had already begun. "That's impossible," Caleb said, his voice tight and steady. "They kicked in our door at 12:03 a.m. I made the 911 call right after. I've got the recording." The retired court clerk adjusted her glasses and squinted at the screen. "And the judge's certification. Look at that. It says 3:22 a.m., just 1 minute after the document was created. Judge Harold wouldn't sign something that fast, and definitely not in the middle of the night." The attorney sitting nearby nodded grimly. "He wasn't even in his office. I checked his credit card records. He was still at the Skyline Bar until 2 o'clock in the morning." Samuel Price's face darkened with anger. "So they fired first and forged later," he said quietly. "Old trick. New technology." Caleb felt that old familiar calm from his SEAL training, the sharp focus that came when a mission became crystal clear. "We need to talk to the current clerk," he said. "The one who actually processed the warrant." The retired clerk sighed. "Sarah Martinez," she said. "She's only been working there for 6 months. Sweet girl, but vulnerable to pressure." Samuel nodded slowly. "I know where she spends her mornings." They found Sarah Martinez at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse. The air smelled of roasted beans and burnt sugar. Sarah looked nervous the moment they walked in. She was young, mid-20s, with tired eyes and shaky hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup. When Caleb and Samuel sat across from her, she swallowed hard. "I know why you're here," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "I've been sick about it since that night." Caleb kept his voice low and gentle. "We're not here to hurt anyone, Sarah. We just need the Tielena. Please." "What happened?" If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe and share your favorite part in the comments below. And don't forget to drop a heart to show your support. Tears filled her eyes. "Judge Harold called me at home," she said, wiping at her cheeks. "He said there was an emergency, that I needed to come in right away and process some important paperwork." She took a shaky breath before continuing. "When I got there, he already had the warrant printed. He told me to enter the time as earlier that night, before the raid. He said the paperwork just needed to match what was already done. He said it was all legal, just delayed." Caleb's jaw clenched. "So he told you to backdate a warrant, after the raid had already happened?" Sarah nodded, crying now. "He said it was for everyone's protection. I didn't know someone had been shot. He told me it was just a formality." Caleb reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and placed it gently on the table. "Sarah," he said softly, "would you be willing to record a statement? Just the Tielena, in your own words." Sarah stared at the phone. "They'll fire me," she whispered. Samuel leaned forward, his eyes kind but firm. "Child," he said gently, "some burdens are heavier than losing a job. The Tielena is one of them." Sarah took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and nodded. Caleb pressed the record. Sarah's voice shook, but she didn't stop. She told him everything: the late-night phone call, Judge Harold's instructions, the timestamps he told her to enter, the people who were in the judge's chambers that night, including a man from Crane Protective Solutions, the private security firm that had helped with the raid. When she finished, Caleb stopped the recording. He immediately saved copies, one to his secure email, another to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, and one to Lena, their investigative journalist ally. "Thank you, Sarah," Caleb said quietly. "You did the right thing." Back at the church, the room was dim and quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Caleb sat alone in one of the pews, his phone in hand, recording a voice memo. 3:21 a.m., he said quietly. "Warrant forged after the raid. Judge Harold ordered clerk Sarah Martinez to backdate the paperwork. Crane representative present during the forgery." He looked up at the stained glass windows glowing faintly in the stormlight. Elena used to love how the colors danced on Sunday mornings. His phone buzzed. A message from Naomi, their daughter. Mom's vitals are improving. She's fighting. Thunder rolled outside. Caleb uploaded the files, sending final copies of Sarah's confession and the evidence. "Let them try to bury this now," he whispered. "The Tielena's already out." Samuel Price's voice echoed down the hall. "Caleb, more files here if you're ready." Caleb stood, shoulders squared. "One piece at a time," he said to himself. "We'll build the case." The storm outside grew louder, but Caleb felt ready. Sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, thin and soft, painting stripes across Elena's white sheets. Caleb sat in the same chair he'd barely left for a week, holding her hand gently. The constant beeping of the monitors had become the rhythm of his days. Then, her fingers twitched. At first, he thought he imagined it. But when her eyes opened, those warm Price eyes he'd fallen in love with 24 years ago, he froze. "Elena," he whispered, leaning forward. "Baby, I'm here." She blinked slowly, confused but aware. The breathing tube stopped her from speaking, but she motioned weakly toward the tray beside her. Caleb quickly grabbed the small whiteboard and marker the nurses had left for her. Her hand shook as she wrote, but her message was clear. Did they say sorry? Caleb's chest tightened. He'd spent 7 long days turning his anger into focus, into action, but seeing her first thought be about accountability made his rage surge again. He swallowed hard, forcing calm into his voice. "Not yet," he said softly. "But they will." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She wrote again, "Our home? We're staying with Samuel Price," Caleb answered gently. "The whole community's helping us. You're not alone." A light knock interrupted them. Lena walked in, her ever-present notebook in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other. Her face lit up when she saw Elena awake. "Mrs. Ward," she said warmly. "It's so good to see you." Elena wrote carefully, "Thank you." Lena sat down, her smile fading into determination. "Caleb," she said, "I have news. My contact at the Justice Department says they're watching this case. If we can build enough public attention, they'll launch a civil rights investigation." Elena wrote, "Tell everyone Tielena matters." Caleb squeezed her hand. "That's exactly what we'll do." He turned to Lena. "I want to organize a march. Peaceful. No anger, just Tielena. We walk together, in daylight." "I'll handle the media," Lena said, already taking notes. "When?" 7 days, Caleb said. 1 week from the night they shot Elena. We'll walk from the church to City Hall. Elena wrote again, "Nurses will come." "Yes," Caleb smiled. "And veterans, teachers, church members, everyone is tired of lies." The door opened again. Naomi rushed in, laptop in hand. When she saw her mom awake, she froze, tears filling her eyes. "Mama," she breathed, hugging Elena carefully around the tubes. Elena smiled weakly and wrote, "My beautiful girl." Naomi wiped her eyes and opened her laptop. "I've been working on something," she said. "A website. To keep the Tielena alive." On the screen, the title read, "Days since the Tielena was shot." A large counter read 7 days. Below it was a timeline listing every lie, every document, every new piece of proof. "Dad," she said, "I want you to record daily updates. Just facts. Come. Real. Let people see who we are." Caleb nodded slowly. "They expect us to be angry, to fit their story. But we'll show them something else." Elena wrote one more message. "Dignity is power." Over the next week, Caleb recorded his updates from Elena's hospital room. "Day 4, he said into the camera. "We confirmed the warrant was created after the raid." Day 5. Private contractors from Crane Protective Solutions helped plan it. Day 6. Judge Harold signed forged documents at 3:21 a.m. The videos spread fast. Naomi's website counter kept ticking higher. Lena's articles exposed more corruption. The Tia Lena could no longer be buried. On the seventh day, hundreds of people gathered outside Samuel Price's church, nurses in scrubs, veterans in uniform caps, elderly church ladies in Sunday best. Each held a small LED candle. No signs. No shouting. Just silent, steady witnesses to the Tia Lena. Caleb helped wheel Elena to the front. She was weak, but she refused to miss it. Someone had pinned her silver hummingbird brooch to her hospital gown. Samuel raised his voice. "We walk in dignity. We walk in Tia Lena. We walk in light." And they did. The crowd began moving down the street, footsteps echoing in rhythm. News cameras followed. Store owners came outside to watch. Office workers pressed their faces to windows. Even the police at intersections stood still, unsure how to respond to this peaceful power. Caleb walked beside Elena's wheelchair, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Above them, news helicopters circled, broadcasting the scene across the country. Hundreds of citizens, walking quietly behind a wounded nurse and her husband, a Navy SEAL, asking one question: when will the Tia Lena be honored? 2 days later, Caleb stood in the marble lobby of City Hall, adjusting his tie. The grand pillars and polished floors looked solid, unshakable. But Caleb knew, everything built by people could crumble under Tia Lena. Outside, cameras flashed like lightning. News vans filled the street. The march had forced the nation to look, and now they couldn't look away. District Attorney Trevor Lang descended the staircase, calm and camera-ready. His perfect suit and silver hair gave him the look of practiced authority. "Commander Ward," Lang said, shaking Caleb's hand. "Thank you for coming. Let's talk in my office." Caleb followed him in. The room was elegant, dark wood, framed law degrees, soft lighting. Lang sat behind his large desk. "I want you to know," he began, "I take these allegations very seriously. What happened to your wife was tragic and—" "Save it," Caleb cut in quietly. "You've had 8 days to care. Instead, you helped bury evidence." Lang's smile faltered. "That's quite an accusation. These situations are complicated." "No," Caleb said firmly. "They're simple. You're helping cover up an attempted murder because it involves Victor Crane's money and the chief's ambitions." Lang's mask slipped. "Commander, stop making these public statements. They could be considered inflammatory." "The Tia Lena often is," Caleb replied coldly. "Think about your family," Lang warned. "Your wife needs rest. Your daughter's future. Why risk it?" Caleb stood slowly, towering over him. "Are you threatening my family?" "Of course not," Lang said quickly. "I'm just saying, this is delicate." "There's nothing delicate about forged warrants or planted evidence," Caleb said. "And nothing delicate about what happens next." He turned toward the door. "Commander Ward," Lang called after him, voice hard now. "If you keep releasing private information, there will be consequences." Caleb stopped in the doorway. "There already are," he said quietly. "You're just not used to them applying to you." He walked out past the flashing cameras, ignoring the shouted questions. His phone rang. Lena's voice was urgent. "Caleb, they're moving against you. The DA filed obstruction charges, says you delayed medical help during the raid. They're calling it interference." Caleb kept walking, his steps steady. "They're desperate." "It gets worse," Lena said. "Someone leaked your old SEAL reprimand. They're saying it proves you're unstable." Caleb let out a bitter laugh. "That reprimand was for refusing to leave a civilian behind. I guess they skipped that part." "What should we do?" Lena asked. "Meet me at the courthouse in 1 hour," Caleb said. "Bring cameras." The sun was setting when Caleb arrived at the courthouse steps. The crowd was already there, news crews, police officers, and community members holding candles. Samuel Price stood at the front, calm as ever. An officer called out, "Caleb Ward, we have a warrant for your arrest." Caleb stopped, looking up at the courthouse. The candlelight flickered across his face. "I know," he said clearly, his voice echoing across the steps. "That's why I'm here." He slowly raised his hands above his head, turning in a full circle so every camera could see him. "I'm not resisting," he said steadily. "I'm reminding you what resisting really looks like." The officers approached carefully, uncertain. Caleb stood tall, proud, unbroken. In that moment, under the bright lights and camera flashes, the Tielena stood beside him, calm, unshakable, and finally seen. As they put the handcuffs on him, Caleb lifted his head and looked straight into each camera lens. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with purpose. 8 days ago, these same officers had broken into his home and shot his wife in their kitchen. Afterward, they planted fake evidence, forged documents, and tried to bury the Tielena under official reports and legal lies. The metal cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, but Caleb didn't flinch. The Tielena, he knew, doesn't stay buried forever. The officers led him up the courthouse steps. A crowd stood gathered outside, holding candles that flickered against the dark evening sky. The people moved aside quietly, making space for the officers and their prisoner. No one shouted or tried to stop them. They just watched in silence, bearing witness. At the top of the steps, Caleb stopped and turned toward the cameras one last time. The handcuffs gleamed in the artificial light, but there was no shame in his face, only quiet certainty and strength. The heavy courthouse doors opened wide, and Caleb walked through them with steady steps, the same calm, determined walk he had shown in battle, in crisis, in every moment since the raid. He was a fighter, but his battlefield wasn't made of dirt and bullets. It was true. And this arrest wasn't a surrender. It was another step toward victory. Across town, in her small dorm room, Caleb's daughter Imani sat in front of her laptop, downloading the 911 call from that night. Her fingers moved fast over the keyboard, her eyes focused and fierce. "Okay, Dad," she whispered. "Let's show them what really happened." Blue light from her computer screens filled the room. On one screen, video editing software showed a timeline full of clips and audio. On the other, social media notifications popped up faster than she could read them. The world had already seen her father's arrest, and reactions were spreading like wildfire. Her hands trembled slightly, but her mind stayed sharp. The 911 recording played clearly, her father's voice steady and calm while chaos echoed in the background. Imani synchronized the call with body cam footage, creating a split-screen video. On the left, the audio waves and timestamps. On the right, the camera's view of the kitchen counter. Caleb's voice described what he saw: 2 coffee mugs, 1 blue, 1 white, a checkered dish towel, a wooden cutting board, a fruit bowl with 3 apples. Imani added small text labels for each item as her father said them. Everything matched perfectly, until the critical moment. The body cam showed Officer Blake turning away for 4.2 seconds. When the camera turned back, a black handgun had suddenly appeared on the counter. Imani froze the frame, zoomed in, and slowed the footage down. The evidence was undeniable. The gun appeared between frames 20341 and 20342. "Got you," Imani muttered, her voice full of quiet fire. She added property records showing the gun's serial number, timestamps from the fake warrant, and metadata proving it was forged. Then she gave the video a simple title: "What Really Happened? The Ward House Raid." At 11:47 p.m., she pressed upload. Within seconds, the numbers began to rise. 100 views, 1,000, 10,000. By midnight, her phone was buzzing non-stop. Local activists shared it first, then national civil rights groups. News outlets started requesting permission to broadcast it. Imani opened her analytics dashboard and watched the lines shoot upward. The video was spreading across every state, translated into new languages, analyzed frame by independent experts. 50,000 views. 100,000. 500,000. Her roommate Jenny burst into the room around 1 a.m., eyes wide. "Imani, you're trending everywhere. The hashtag ward counter is #1. Imani barely looked up. "Good. Help me track the responses. We need screenshots and backups before they try to take it down." But no one took it down. The Tielena was moving too fast. By 2 a.m., major news networks were running stories. Legal experts were dissecting the evidence on live TV. Former police officers confirmed the inconsistencies. The view count hit 1 million, then 2 million, then 3 million. At dawn, Imani's phone buzzed again. It was her friend Lena. "You did it," Lena said breathlessly. "The video blew everything open. And I've got something else. Phone records." Imani sat up straighter. "What kind of records?" "The kind that shows District Attorney Lange called Victor Crane 12 times the night of the raid. First call at 11:42 p.m., 20 minutes before they hit your house. Last call at 3:19 a.m., 2 minutes before the forged warrant was filed." "Send them," Imani said, already opening a new file. Within minutes, the data arrived. She created a timeline showing the raid and the calls side by side, proving clear coordination between the police and private contractors. By mid-morning, the video had over 5 million views. Justice for Wards was trending globally. The family's legal defense fund had already raised over $200,000 from supporters around the world. News crews filled the streets outside the police department, the courthouse, and the district attorney's office. The biggest moment came at 9 a.m., when Chief Mercer arrived at City Hall. Her black SUV rolled into the parking lot, and reporters immediately surrounded her. Microphones reached toward her like accusing fingers. "Chief Mercer, did you know about the planted gun? Was this operation linked to Crane Protective Solutions? Why was the warrant falsified? Are you planning to resign?" Mercer's professional mask cracked. Her face turned red as she shouted, "No comment!" again and again, trying to push through the mob. The cameras caught every moment, her panic, her anger, her trembling hands as the elevator doors slowly closed. In his hospital room, Caleb watched the footage on his phone. Elena slept beside him, her face pale but peaceful. Caleb's expression stayed calm, but his eyes glowed with fierce satisfaction. "Tia Elena doesn't need permission," he whispered, gently fixing Elena's blanket. On the table beside her, her small hummingbird pin caught the morning light, scattering rainbows across the walls. Outside, crowds of supporters gathered, holding signs high, their candles glowing bright in the new day. Across town, Imani leaned back in her chair, exhausted but victorious. Her screen still flashed with activity. New shares, new comments, new allies. The view count passed 6 million and kept climbing. The Tia Elena was unstoppable now, spreading faster than anyone could control. No amount of money or power could silence it. The dam had broken, and justice was flooding through the cracks. The church basement smelled of old hymnals and coffee. Caleb sat in the shadows, watching Officer Daniel Reyes pace nervously between metal chairs. "They'll know I came here," Reyes whispered. "The Union watches everything." "Sit down, Daniel," Caleb said calmly. "You're making me dizzy." Reyes sat hard, his chair scraping on the concrete floor. "I should have spoken up that night, when they stopped the medics. I heard everything, on the radio." "What radio?" Caleb asked. "Dispatch logs show silence during those 12 minutes. Reyes hesitated, then pulled out his department radio. He pressed a sequence of buttons, and a hidden frequency crackled to life. "Channel 7 Echo," he explained. "Encrypted. No logs, no records. They use it for secret operations." Caleb leaned forward. "Show me." Reyes repeated the sequence slowly. That night, Chief Mercer came on herself. She ordered us to secure the scene before letting medics in. Said we needed time to fix the narrative. 12 minutes, Caleb said quietly. They let Elena bleed for 12 minutes. "I can prove it," Reyes said. "I've been recording that channel since that night. I even have new recordings." Yesterday, Lieutenant Hayes said, "Keep the body cams off until the story's clean." He set a small recorder on the table. "It's all here." "Why now?" Caleb asked. "Because I became a cop to help people," Reyes said firmly. "Not to protect corruption. My father wore this badge for 30 years. He taught me it's supposed to mean honor." He looked Caleb in the eye. I'll wear a wire. Get you more evidence. Caleb picked up the recorder carefully. They'll destroy you for this. They're already destroying themselves, Reyes said. At least this way, I can live with myself. The next morning, Reyes went into headquarters wearing a hidden microphone. Caleb listened from a van 3 blocks away. For 2 hours, nothing important happened. Then Mercer called an emergency meeting. The Ward case is contained, her voice said. D.A. Lang has handled the warrant. Judge Harold is on board. What about the gun discrepancy? Someone asked. Property records have been changed, Lieutenant Hayes answered. The inventory numbers no longer match. Then Reyes spoke carefully. And the radio traffic from that night? What radio traffic? Mercer snapped. Channel 7 Echo is clean. Always has been. A new voice broke in. Chief, we have a problem. Unauthorized access to encrypted channels. Lock down the building, Mercer shouted. Nobody leaves until we find the leak. Coffee sounds good right now, Reyes said clearly. I need some coffee. Caleb jumped to his feet. That was the signal. But seconds later, the transmission cut off. An hour later, breaking news flashed everywhere. Reyes was shown being led out in handcuffs, accused of stealing data. Mercer stood at a podium, calling him a traitor. In the hospital, Elena stirred weakly. They hurt him, she whispered. Yes, Caleb said, holding her hummingbird pin. But his Elena is safe now. That night, the Ward home burned. Flames tore through the house as Caleb stood barefoot on the lawn, watching 30 years of memories vanish into smoke. A firefighter brought him a small, blackened object, a police union challenge coin found jammed in the fire hydrant. Someone had wanted the fire to burn unchecked. Moments later, Imani and Elena arrived, tears in their eyes. Caleb hugged them both tightly. We're alive, he said firmly. Everything else is just things. Behind them, the flames roared higher, painting the night sky orange. Caleb stood steady, holding his family close, as their past turned to ash and their fight for Elena burned brighter than ever. The heavy wooden doors of the old city auditorium burst open with a loud crash, slamming hard against the walls. The sound made everyone jump. Chief Mercer marched in first, her face red with anger, her eyes burning like fire. Behind her came Officer Blake, tall and broad-shouldered, his jaw tight with fury, and 2 other officers followed close behind. Their boots hit the polished wooden floor with sharp, echoing thuds as they strode down the center aisle, heading straight for the stage where Caleb stood. This unauthorized broadcast ends right now, Mercer shouted, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. You have no permit for this gathering. The entire room seemed to freeze for a moment. People turned in their seats, eyes wide. Some gasped softly. But then, almost as if on cue, every phone in the room lifted. Dozens of screens glowed, cameras aimed at the officers as they approached. Lena's camera crew moved fast, repositioning themselves to cover the scene from every angle. Their tripods stood firm, lenses focusing sharply on the line of police cutting through the crowd. Caleb didn't move. He stood tall at the podium, his hand resting on its edge, his eyes calm but sharp. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and clear. This is a public building, he said. And we're here during open hours. We have every right to be here. Mercer's expression tightened even more. Her mouth pressed into a thin line as she glared at him. Behind her, Blake shoved past an elderly woman in a flowered dress without even looking. The woman stumbled, grabbing the back of a chair to keep from falling. The crowd gasped loudly. Her husband, a Korean War veteran with silver hair and a wrinkled face full of pride, began to rise from his seat, anger flashing in his eyes. But before he could take a step, Caleb spoke again, his voice calm but firm. Please, sir, he said. Stay seated. Let them show the world who they really are. The veteran froze, then slowly sank back down, his jaw tight. The cameras caught everything. The shove, the gasp, the control in Caleb's voice. Mercer reached the front row, her polished heels clacking sharply against the floor. You are interfering with an active investigation, she snapped. "Shut down those cameras immediately." But instead of shutting anything down, Lena's team zoomed in closer. The tension in the air thickened. Naomi glanced at her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she monitored the livestream feed. "Over 70,000 watching now," she whispered to Caleb. "And it's still climbing fast." The air in the auditorium felt electric, buzzing with energy, fear, and anger. Blake's heavy steps echoed louder as he began walking toward the stage, his hand brushing the side of his holster. His face was red and his eyes burned with hate. Caleb noticed it immediately. He had seen that look before, the look of someone ready to use force, someone on the edge. He studied the room in one sharp glance, his mind switching into a kind of slow-motion clarity that came from years of training. Blake, 8 feet away, dominant hand near his weapon. Second officer, 12 feet to the right, baton drawn. 2 more officers by the door, hands hovering near their guns but uncertain. Around them sat over 100 civilians, families, nurses, veterans, churchgoers, all staring, frightened but defiant. Blake's hand closed around the grip of his gun. Caleb moved first. He stepped down from the podium in a smooth, powerful motion. Before Blake could even pull the weapon from its holster, Caleb grabbed his wrist, twisting it sharply. A sickening crack echoed through the auditorium. Blake screamed in pain as his gun flew from his hand and clattered to the floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd. One of the other officers charged forward, swinging his baton wildly. Caleb ducked low, the baton whistling over his head. He stepped in fast, hooking his foot behind the officer's ankle while driving his shoulder into the man's chest. The officer's feet flew out from under him, and he hit the floor hard, the air rushing out of his lungs with a painful grunt. Caleb pressed his knee against the man's chest, holding him down firmly but not cruelly. "Stay down," Caleb said quietly, his voice even. "You're on camera." Every lens in the room captured it, the calm precision of a man who wasn't fighting out of rage but out of discipline. Blake stumbled back, clutching his broken wrist with his good hand. His face twisted in pain and fury. He fumbled at his belt and pulled out a tactical knife. The blade gleamed in the light streaming through the tall auditorium windows. "I'll kill you," Blake roared, charging forward. Caleb stayed calm. His breathing was slow, steady. He'd been in far worse situations, war zones, raids, ambushes, but this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. This was home. This was the Tielena on trial. As Blake swung the knife, Caleb stepped in close. He deflected the blade with his forearm, ignoring the sting as the edge grazed his skin. He pivoted smoothly and slammed his shoulder into Blake's chest, driving him backward into the podium with a loud crash that made the microphone squeal. Before Blake could recover, Caleb reached for the microphone cord. In one quick, practiced motion, he wrapped it around Blake's arm and twisted, pinning the officer's weapon hand. The crowd barely breathed. Every sound, every gasp, every movement seemed magnified. Caleb tightened the cord, forcing Blake's arm behind him. Then he moved in closer, slipping his other arm around Blake's neck in a controlled chokehold. "Drop it," Caleb said, his voice low and calm. Blake's eyes bulged with rage, but the knife slipped from his fingers, falling to the floor with a metallic clatter. Caleb held the choke for one more second, just long enough for the fight to drain out of the man's body, then released it. Blake dropped to his knees, coughing and gasping for breath. The entire fight had taken less than 10 seconds. Caleb stood over him, his breathing steady, his face calm. A thin line of blood trickled down his forearm, but his hands didn't shake. He looked down at the man who had once kicked in his door and shot his wife without hesitation. "That's mercy," Caleb said quietly, his voice steady as stone. "The kind you never gave her." The room fell completely silent. No one moved. The only sounds were Blake's ragged breathing and the quiet hum of the cameras still recording. Dozens of lenses focused on Caleb, the man standing tall and unbroken, his hands streaked with blood, and Blake kneeling before him, bound by the microphone cord like a symbol of shame. Chief Mercer stood frozen in front of the stage, her face pale but furious. She glanced at the 2 officers by the doors, but they hesitated. Both had drawn their guns, but neither dared move. The crowd was too thick. There were too many cameras. One wrong move, one shot, and the entire world would see it. The elderly woman Blake had shoved earlier now stood proudly at the edge of the aisle. Her hands trembled slightly, but she held her phone high, recording everything. Beside her, the old veteran gave a slow, approving nod. His sharp eyes locked on Caleb. Naomi stood near her tech setup, tears glimmering in her eyes, but her hand stayed steady as she managed the live stream. "Over 90,000 watching now," she whispered. "We're going viral everywhere." The tension in the auditorium felt like a physical force pressing down on everyone. Caleb slowly bent down, picked up the fallen knife, and placed it carefully on the podium. He wiped his blood from his hand with a cloth from his pocket, then looked back out at the crowd. "This," he said, his voice steady but strong, "is what they didn't want you to see." He turned toward the camera, looking directly into the lens. "They came here to silence us, to shut down the Tialena. But Tialena doesn't need permission to be spoken, it only needs people brave enough to speak it." The crowd erupted in cheers and clapping. Some people stood, tears running down their faces. Others shouted words of support, their voices echoing through the high-ceilinged hall. Mercer took a small step back. Her control of the situation was slipping fast. The entire nation, maybe even the world, was watching this unfold live. She turned sharply toward the other officers. "Get him under control," she barked. But none of them moved. One officer looked at her uncertainly, then at Caleb, then at the crowd. Finally, he shook his head. "Ma'am," he said softly, "we can't. Not like this. Not in front of all these people." Mercer's eyes flashed with disbelief and anger. "That's an order." The officer didn't respond. Instead, he holstered his gun slowly and took a step back. The others followed his lead. The room was no longer under her control. It belonged to the people now. Caleb looked down at Blake, still kneeling and clutching his injured arm. He leaned slightly forward, his voice low but firm. "You should be thankful this is being watched by thousands," he said. "Because if it weren't, you'd still think you could act like the law doesn't apply to you." Blake didn't answer. His face was red with shame and pain. He avoided Caleb's eyes. Caleb turned back to the podium. "We started this gathering to share evidence," he said. "But what just happened here, this is evidence too. Evidence of power without accountability. Of violence used to hide the Tialena." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some shouted, "Tell it," and "Speak the Tialena." Naomi angled one of the cameras upward, framing Caleb perfectly against the tall windows where golden sunlight poured through. Dust floated in the light like drifting ash. The scene looked almost sacred, the people's hall filled with witnesses, their stories waiting to be heard. Caleb lifted the microphone, his hand steady despite the blood still drying on his skin. "We will not stop," he said. "Not until every voice is heard. Not until justice means something again." His words carried through the room, strong and clear. In the back, the DOJ investigator, the man who had arrived quietly earlier, stood up slowly. He closed his notebook and looked at Caleb with a nod of deep respect. Then he turned and walked out, phone already pressed to his ear. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Inside, the people stood together. Nurses, veterans, families, students, all united in one shared Tialena. Caleb took one final look around the hall. Blake was being helped up by one of his fellow officers, still shaking. Mercer stood rigid, eyes darting, realizing her power was crumbling right before her. Caleb turned back to the microphone. "Let this moment be recorded," he said. "Not as violence, but as awakening. They tried to bury us in lies. But we are still here. We are still standing. And the Tialena," he looked toward the crowd, toward the cameras, toward the world, "the Tialena is alive." A roar of applause filled the hall. The sound was deafening, rising like a wave that shook the old wooden walls. Outside the auditorium, more people were gathering, drawn by the live stream, by the noise, by the sense that something historic was happening inside. And inside, beneath the tall golden windows, Caleb stood tall, bloodied, steady, and unbroken, while the people rose around him like a tide. The fight for Tielena had only just begun. The afternoon sunlight came through the windows, casting a long shadow of Caleb across the floor. It stretched toward the big doors, the same kind that had been broken down at his home just 8 days ago. Suddenly, the heavy doors at the back of the auditorium burst open again. Federal agents. Everyone, stay where you are. Agents in dark jackets with DOJ printed on their backs rushed in, guns drawn but pointed toward the floor. The crowd went quiet, moving aside to make a wide path down the center. A tall woman with short gray hair walked quickly toward the stage. She was the lead agent, Agent Rowan. 2 agents stood beside Chief Mercer, while others moved to arrest Blake and the other officers. Caleb didn't move. His hands were visible by his sides. "Agent Rowan," he said calmly. He recognized her from earlier communications. "I think this is what you've been waiting for." He slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "Everything's here," he said. Fake warrants, false timestamps, the secret deal with Crane Solutions, radio messages ordering delays for medical help, tampered body camera footage, everything. Plus about 70,000 live witnesses. Agent Rowan took the drive, her face unreadable. She spoke into her radio. "Control, this is Rowan. Evidence in hand. Execute all pending warrants." The air was thick with tension. More agents came in with U.S. Marshals, spreading out to guard every exit. "Chief Dana Mercer," Rowan's voice rang out through the silent hall, "you are under arrest for conspiracy against rights, obstruction of justice, and violating your oath of office under color of law." Mercer's face went pale. "This is ridiculous. I demand to speak to." "You have the right to remain silent," Rowan interrupted firmly. "I suggest you use it." As another officer handcuffed her, District Attorney Trevor Lang tried to slip quietly toward a side door, but 2 marshals blocked his path. "Trevor Lang, you are under arrest for conspiracy against rights and obstruction of justice." The side door opened again, and agents dragged in Victor Crane, the powerful private security contractor. His fancy suit was wrinkled, and his usual confidence was gone. "This is outrageous. Do you know who I am?" he shouted. "Yes," Rowan replied coldly. "A private contractor who worked with police to violate people's rights. Among other crimes we'll be adding." Next came Judge Harold. He no longer wore his judge's robe, only a wrinkled dress shirt. He looked much older now. He didn't fight as agents cuffed his hands. Officer Blake, still on his knees, was lifted up and formally arrested. The microphone cord that had wrapped around his arm dropped to the ground like a snake's shed skin. Samuel Price slowly stood, his voice rising in the quiet room. "Brothers and sisters, let us remind them of the law they swore to uphold." He pulled a small copy of the Constitution from his pocket. Others in the crowd did the same, forming a line on both sides as the arrested officials were led out. "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice." The words echoed through the hall as Mercer was led away, her head bowed. "Ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense." Lang walked next, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "Promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity." Crane tried to turn away from the cameras, but there was nowhere to hide. "Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Judge Harold shuffled through, looking years older than before. Blake came last, his broken wrist cuffed tightly. He walked through the crowd of citizens holding their copies of the Constitution high. Lena's cameras captured every moment. Naomi's live stream counter showed over 200,000 people watching. Phones were raised from every corner, recording the arrests as justice finally happened in real time. The crowd began to react as the Tielena sank in. Elderly women wiped tears from their faces. Veterans stood straight with pride. Young activists hugged one another, some crying with relief. At the back of the room, Elena appeared, supported by a nurse from the hospital. She wore a robe over her hospital gown and slowly pushed her four-pole as she walked. The crowd silently made way for her. Caleb jumped off the stage to meet her, gently lifting her up the stairs even though she weakly protested. Naomi ran to them, wrapping her arms around her parents. The three of them stood together on the stage where chaos had once reigned, now surrounded by peace. Elena touched Caleb's bruised knuckles with her good hand. "They kicked in our door," Caleb whispered, holding her and Naomi close. "We opened theirs." The afternoon sun filled the old auditorium, lighting up the empty podium, the fallen chairs, and the discarded microphone cord. The light fell across the small family standing together, whole again. Agent Rowan spoke softly into her radio. "Control. Suspects secured. Justice served." Her words echoed faintly in the big hall, a fitting end to 8 long days that began with a broken door and ended with Tielena shining through every wall built to hide it. 6 months later, the morning sun painted warm colors across the freshly painted walls of the Elena Ward Community Care Center. Where burned ruins once stood, a new 2-story building now rose proudly. Its modern design was brightened with flower boxes, benches, and a beautiful hummingbird mural wrapping around the corner. Caleb stood on the front steps, fixing his tie. The crowd gathering for the opening ceremony showed the heart of the neighborhood. Elderly church members in their best clothes, veterans with service pins, nurses from Elena's old hospital, and families with kids and grandparents. Lena Cross, camera in hand, moved through the crowd filming interviews for her documentary. She spoke to an older woman who had been at the people's deposition. "That day changed everything," the woman said. "It showed us what real courage looks like." Elena came out from the center's doors, walking carefully with a cane but standing tall. Her navy dress matched the building's trim, and on her collar, her hummingbird pin sparkled in the morning light. The crowd quieted as she walked to the podium. The new mayor, elected after the old government collapsed, stepped up to speak. "Today, we're not just opening a building," the mayor said. "We're opening a new chapter for our city." She held up a thick document. "These reforms will make sure no other family suffers like the Averys did." She listed them one by one. A full ban on no-knock warrants. A civilian oversight board with access to all body camera footage. Union reforms that require accountability for misconduct. Community service hours required for all officers. De-escalation training led by healthcare professionals. She looked toward Elena as she said the last one. At the back of the crowd stood Officer Daniel Reyes, now in civilian clothes. He had been cleared of all charges and was the first to volunteer at the center, helping to rebuild trust. Some of his fellow officers, those who had told the Tielena, joined him, forming a small group dedicated to real change. Naomi, now working as the center's social media and outreach manager, guided elderly visitors to shaded seats. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages from other cities asking how to start their own programs. The ward model was spreading, turning tragedy into transformation across the country. Samuel Price led a short prayer. His voice was strong and full of hope. "Let this place heal both body and soul. Let it stand as proof that justice, though delayed, cannot be denied when good people stand together." Elena lifted the scissors to cut the ribbon. Caleb stood beside her, gently placing a hand on her back. The breeze carried the smell of fresh paint and flowers. With one clean snip, the ribbon fell, and cheers filled the air. Inside, the center buzzed with life. The first floor held exam rooms, a pharmacy, and mental health offices. Upstairs were classrooms where Caleb would teach civic courage seminars, helping veterans and community members learn how to organize, document, and demand change peacefully. Lena filmed everything for her nearly finished documentary, Command Under Fire, a story about how patience and Tielena defeated corruption. She showed the walls covered in framed headlines. Justice Department arrests police leaders. Reform bill passes unanimously. Community center rises from the ashes. Down the hall, children had painted tiny hummingbirds on tiles at their height. Each one carried a message of hope. Peace lives here. Tielena heals. Our door is open. Elena led tours, showing visitors the free clinic, meeting rooms, and the garden being planted out back. Many doctors and nurses volunteered their time to make sure the center would always serve the people. As the evening came, the crowd slowly went home. The sun set, turning the hallways golden. Caleb watched Officer Reyes help an old man through the new doors. Reyes's face was calm, the peace of someone who had chosen what was right over what was easy. He had lost his badge but found his conscience. Lena filmed her final scene, Elena in the garden, the hummingbird pin glowing in the sunset as she spoke about healing and community. When the day ended, Caleb walked through each room, checking everything before closing up. The center felt alive with hope. Every corner was made to welcome, to help, to teach. Elena waited by the front doors, watching him. The last rays of sunlight made the brass handle shine like gold. Caleb joined her, their hands meeting naturally. "This door stays open," he whispered. Elena smiled and placed her hand over his. Above them, the mural of the hummingbird glowed softly in the fading light, its wings spread wide, forever in flight. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more kind and powerful stories. Watch our next video for another unforgettable journey. And share this story with someone who needs it today.